Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Science Rundown. This is Nick Capman with the FDA Group. Before we jump into our discussion for today, just a little bit about the FDA Group. We help life science companies in the areas of quality assurance, regulatory affairs, clinical operations, commission and qualification and validation, as well as CMC. We offer 3 different engagement models, which are consulting, staff augmentation, and full-time employee recruitment. So if you ever find yourself in need, just head over to the FDAgroup.com to check us out and get in touch. Today, I am speaking with Donna Dorozinsky from Time GCP. Hey, Donna.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Nick.
Absolutely. Before we get into our topic for today, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Donna Dorozinsky. I am the founder and CEO of Time GCP. So we are a eClinical business and technology consulting and services company that supports pharma biotech companies in the areas of inspection readiness and just overall GCP compliance. So we're the people you call after you found the problem, or we can help you find the problem, but we're problem solvers.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So today we're going to be talking about TMFs and some of the challenges that organizations face. So maybe a good place to start is, what is a trial master file, and why is it so important as it pertains to GCP compliance?
Yeah, I'm really passionate about the trial master file. From my perspective, the trial master file is the story of your study. It's the good parts, it's the not so good parts, and it's even some of the challenges that might have happened in the study. But it's your opportunity to capture the entire study all in one place. And so whether you are doing the clinical data or your regulatory, if you contribute in any way to the outcome of the study, then you're actually generating content for the trial master file.
Okay, excellent. I know standardizing is an important part. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So back in the early 2000s, organizations were all structuring their trial master files in different ways. There was no really standard way of formatting your TMF. And in 2007, a group of people from industry got together and built what's called the TMF Reference Model. Today, that is sitting with CDISC, so it's kind of been absorbed into the CDISC group. But what's nice about it is that if everyone, most organizations and certainly all vendors have adapted the TMF reference model. It has evolved over time. We are working to make it a true standard in industry. And why it's so important is because if you're a sponsor and you've put your study with a CRO and that CRO's holding the TMF, they're using a structure for their content. And maybe you've got another CRO that you're using for another TMF. And maybe there are even 2 CROs on the same study. At the end of the study, you have to take possession of that trial master file. If everybody's using the same standard structure, it's a lot easier to bring that content together. Back before we had the reference model, when we would try to integrate a CRO structure into the sponsor structure, it would be very expensive for the companies to do that. And many times they just didn't even bother to try. They just kept different files. So today, by having that standard structure, if you're the sponsor and you need to go and look in your CRO's TMF, you know that it's going to pretty much look the same. The other value is that our regulators have come to expect that we're going to use the reference model structure. It's just easier for them to find their way around. It takes less learning on their part. They're less apt to miss content because we're really structuring the content all in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Now, for people that are putting together a TMF, if they're concerned, is this adequate? How is the quality? How do they determine that? What should they be looking for?
Sure. So there's really 3 components to a quality TMF. First of all, there's the record quality. If you're putting records into your TMF that have missing pages or are draft records, or maybe you don't have them filed in the right location, there's that record quality component. And then the next thing is timeliness. Are we actually filing our content in a timely manner? Right? It used to be we would pull our TMF, oh, we're getting ready for an inspection. Let's make sure we have a good TMF. And they would pull it all together at the end. Well, today regulators say, no, that's not okay. With eTMF, when you upload a record, you get a data stamp that's a piece of metadata for that document. So if you're uploading all your content 3 weeks or a month before the inspector gets there, your regulatory inspector is going to know that. And so by keeping that TMF up to date in a timely manner, it helps you keep your story on track. I don't know about you, but if I've ever tried to recall a story 3 years later, it's really hard to do. But
Mm.
if I'm putting all that content in over time, my story actually just begins to tell itself. And then the third part of it is the completeness of the TMF, because I want credit for what happened in my study. I don't think any of us have ever had the perfect study. There's always issues, there's always challenges. The key is, as a sponsor, early identification and remediation. And so by keeping those kind of three quality factors, completeness, timeliness, and record quality, it can give you a greater confidence in the quality of your overall TMF.
Excellent. Now, I'm aware that some companies will rely on their CROs to manage the TMF. What are some of the things that they should keep in mind if they choose to allow the CRO to do that for them?
Sure, that's a great option for a lot of companies. They work with they work with their partner CRO, so they're used to working in their CRO's TMF. There's a couple of things that they need to keep in mind as the sponsor of the study. So even if it's like anything else. If you give a responsibility to the CRO, you're still ultimately responsible for it, and you need to have oversight. So just like you have to have oversight of your investigator site monitoring, you need to have some type of oversight of the CRO's TMF. So whether it's performance metrics, whether it's routine completeness oversight reviews, taking a risk-based approach, you're counting on your CRO to have a quality TMF. So you as the sponsor would be going in and taking a look yourselves to make sure that what they say they're doing is what they're actually doing. The other thing you really need to keep in mind is as a sponsor, you're generating TMF content as well, and your other vendors are. The majority of the time, sponsors just think, oh, the CRO's got this, I don't need to worry about it. But if you go and talk to the CRO, the only thing they have is the things they're responsible for. They're not going out and collecting content from other vendors to bring into their TMF. So as a sponsor, you have to maintain some type of TMF content as well. So whether you have your own TMF or you work with your vendors to hold content and then bring it all together at the end, as a sponsor, whether your CRO is managing your content or you're managing your content, you need an overall plan for the quality, like we just talked about, as well as the oversight of where all that content is.
Makes sense. I'm also aware that a lot of companies use eTMFs, although that can be a large investment for smaller companies. So could you comment on that reality?
Absolutely. I think every organization has to decide when it's the right time for them to have an eTMF. Sometimes sponsors are retaining content on shared drives, on maybe unvalidated spaces. Even if your CRO is maintaining the TMF, if you have content, you still have an obligation to maintain that in a validated environment. And so if you're maintaining it on SharePoint and you haven't validated, then you don't actually have a compliant trial master file. So a lot of times sponsors will be getting ready to start their phase 2B or their phase 3 study, and they still don't have arrangements for a TMF. I think it depends on your long-term goal, right? Some companies are looking just to do a study, have their asset acquired, and move on. And so maybe that's not the right time to invest in a big eTMF. There are solutions out there that are actually fairly cost effective, and it's not a huge investment. I think the biggest thing that companies need to worry about is what's their strategy for having a compliant TMF. We know that EMA, MHRA, the TMF is the basis of the inspection. So if you're getting an inspection from EMA or MHRA, they're going to go into your TMF. They're going to want access prior to the inspection and sometimes as much as 6 months after the inspection. And so you have to have a plan for doing that within your organization, whether you're a small company or a big company. So I think understanding what your ultimate goal is for your asset and your organization helps you figure out when's the right time to invest in TMF. Just going out and getting an eTMF system and not thinking about supporting business process and how you're going to migrate the content together and having some kind of quality oversight is not a good idea. So when you go get that TMF, you need to have more than just the technology. You've got to make sure that you've got the business processes to support that.
Great point. In our industry, there's lots of mergers and acquisitions that are happening. What are some of the considerations that companies need to take into account as it pertains to the TMF when a merger and acquisition is happening?
So this is a really important item that a lot of organizations don't think about, right? They're thinking about acquiring the science, acquiring the technology, and they're not really thinking about the documentation. But if you remember when I defined the TMF, it's the story of the study. So if you're purchasing an asset, if you're acquiring an asset, or even you're selling an asset, that story is critical. I can't tell you how many times clients have come to us and said, yeah, we just acquired this asset and oh my gosh, the TMF's a mess. Can you help us? And we literally have gone through and tried to figure out the story. And invariably, pieces are missing. I once actually went in and did an audit for a company that they were acquiring an asset. And at the 11th hour, they said, hey, we better make sure the TMF is complete. And they literally brought me in the day before they were signing the papers. And there was nothing there. It was a bunch of boxes. And I was like, where's all your communications? Oh, that's on so-and-so's computer. And he's been gone for 3 years. Like, well, that contributes to the story. I was involved in an inspection once where we were able to explain away a safety concern from an inspector with a series of emails that had been sent during the study. And those emails became critical to the successful outcome of the inspection. And so if companies don't think about that story that they're buying, then they may find they acquire the asset, they bring in the TMF, and they aren't able to use that study for an inspection because there's no story there. Again, like I said, especially if you're going to go for if you have a risk of EMA or MHRA inspection, because they're going to want to be in there seeing and understanding what the TMF is. I had a recent company that I was working with, and they had acquired the asset, and there were a lot of, when we got in there were a lot of issues with the TMF. So their concern is, well, is the FDA going to hold us accountable? And the answer is yes. As the IND holder, you're accountable for what happened during this study. And so when you're going to acquire an asset or you're going to sell an asset, you want to make sure that you understand that story that's being told.
Hmm. And we know that the regulatory authorities are going to be looking at it, and you've talked about that so far. Are there any other points that you wanted to highlight as it pertains to a regulatory inspection in the TMF?
Yeah, I think that companies that just manage their TMF in preparation for a regulatory inspection, I think are missing the whole point of the TMF. The TMF is the window into the quality of your study. And so, for example, when we do completeness review, one of the things we look for is protocol training. I've seen organizations get 483 for having inadequate investigator training. Now, they don't come out and look to say, oh, is all your training there? Yeah, they'll collect training records. But if they start to see protocol deviations around a specific topic, they're going to want to know, what did you as a sponsor do to gain compliance? And so that TMF should have that evidence in it, right? So it's not just about, do I have my 1572s? Do I have my CVs? That's the easy part. It's the stories. It's the things that happened that were issues. Is that content available? Can I actually tell my story with my content? Ideally, there's minimal interviews in an inspection because the TMF is telling the story. The TMF, everything the inspector needs to know is found in a well-organized and complete TMF.
Okay. As it pertains to some of the recent regulatory findings related to the TMF, what are some things that the audience should consider?
Yeah, so we've seen actually the EMA just released their document on findings from 2022. We actually saw some findings related to computer system validation of the trial master file. We saw some findings related to availability of records. And we also saw some investigator site findings around availability of records. And so in the past, we've always thought of the TMF as the sponsor's responsibility. But in the EMA guidances, they actually call out that the TMF is made up of the sponsor's files and the investigator's files. So the investigator site has an obligation to retain their records around what happened in their study as well. And many times sponsors are worried about, can the PI do a good job in the interviews? But that reg file or that trial master file that's located at the investigator site is really important, because strategically regulators might go to the investigator site, figure out what happened there, and then go to the sponsor, say, well, the issues we saw at that investigator site, how did you as the sponsor manage them? So they may connect them together. Sometimes they'll say, oh no, we already inspected that site, everything was good, so we're not going to worry about that site, and they'll look at other things when they come to the sponsor. But I think the key point is there is a deep focus on the records. Now, the FDA is starting to inspect within the TMF, and more inspectors are moving in that direction. As the FDA partners with MHRA and EMA on doing inspections, they're learning that approach. And I think in the next several years, you're going to see where not only do we need to work to be concerned about EMA and MHRA looking at our TMF, but we also need to understand that the FDA is going to look at our TMF as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, this was fantastic information. Before we end, what are some parting thoughts on the TMF and GCP compliance that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to say to the audience is that leverage your TMF. It is your story. Don't just make it an afterthought that some group independently looks at for you, but make sure that you understand all of that determines quality, right? That content's being uploaded in a timely manner, that you have good records in there, and that you have a complete TMF. And whether you're holding that TMF or your CRO or a lot of your partners are holding it, you as the sponsor do have ultimate accountability for its completeness and its quality. And so you control your story, right? You control how complete your story is. Own that part of it and make sure that your story reflects what actually happened during the study.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Donna. This was really enlightening. And for everybody listening, as always, if you find conversations like this valuable, please share it with a colleague or your professional network. If you haven't already, subscribe to get updates of new episodes at thefdagroup.com/podcast and follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn. If you'd like to connect about project or resource needs, head over to thefdagroup.com to get in touch, or feel free to connect with me personally on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next time.
Thanks, Nick.